For me, the starting point for thinking about animals and Christian theology is to remember that Christians believe in a God who is the creator not just of some things, but of all things, the God of all creatures. So that means that Christians need a vision, a theological vision of God and the world that is big enough to encompass that realization of God as the creator of all things. And that has big implications for the way we do Christian theology. We need a theology that's capable of engaging with black holes and stars and distant galaxies. But we also need a theology that's capable of dealing with the other living things that we find around us on our planet, including animals. So theology has often been preoccupied with God's relationship with the human, and for understandable reasons. We're human, we're primarily concerned for a lot of the time with how we and the beings most like us are living and going about their lives. But we are heir to biblical scriptures and Christian theological traditions that recognize that we find our human being alongside the being of other creatures, including animal creatures. Our scriptures are full of the place of animal creatures before God. So in the opening narratives of creation in Genesis, we find God creating all kinds of creatures, declaring them good in their own right, without respect to their utility to any other kinds of creatures, and affirming their place within this good order of creation. Elsewhere in the Old Testament, we find the great Psalms of creation, like Psalm 104, affirming the ordering of God of these myriad kinds of creatures, each given their own place to flourish before God. And in other parts of the Psalms, glorifying God in their flourishing. Celebrating their being before God, living out their creaturely existence in response to the gift of creation grace to them. So that means that Christians need to be attending very carefully to what it means to be in relationship with the God who is the God of these creatures, and what that means for how we live alongside them. And again, thinking about that kind of responsibility to other animals is also present in the scriptures that we find ourselves reading. So there are some basic ethical questions about practice in relation to other animals that the scriptures are concerned about. Genesis 1 deals with the question of what we're to eat, for example, and declares that while human beings are given dominion over other creatures and are uniquely made in God's image, by the end of Genesis 1, the diet specified for these creatures who are to image God is a vegan one. All animals, humans and other animals, are to be eating plants according to this originating vision of what it looks like when God's will is fully done. When we move forward and look at Genesis 9, when things have shifted, so after the flood, the earth has been filled with violence. God has Noah rescue both his family and representative animal species on the ark. When they come out of the ark, God declares that there's going to be a plan B in relation to creation. The food rules have changed, so humans are given explicit permission to eat animals for the first time in Genesis 9. But that's under strictly limited conditions. The animals are not to be eaten with their blood, and voluminous texts of law later in the Old Testament specify that into different kinds of clean and unclean animals, and also particular ways of slaughtering them in particular times and places by particular people according to particular rituals. So this question of eating animals is really significant in relation to Old Testament narratives, and also turns out to be controversial within the New Testament too. And so our scriptures are concerned with what it means for us to live well alongside these other creatures. And there are other examples of that too in the Old Testament. So we find regulations about how domesticated animals are to be treated. For example, they're to be given consideration under Sabbath legislation. You shouldn't be making your draft animals work any more than you should be working, or any of your family or your servants should be working on the Sabbath. So animals are entitled to that kind of consideration. There are various regulations about treating animals well, not muzzling the ox when it's treading the grain, and even responsibilities to wild animals. So when there's a Sabbath for the land, one of the things that happens when you leave the land fallow in the seventh year is that wild animals have the opportunity to find food from the land. And so there's a real sense of a human vocation within this wider world, creaturely animal world, both in relation to domesticated animals and wild animals too. Israel is also looking further ahead. So when the prophets think about what needs remedy in relation to the distance between the way Israel is living as a community and their calling by God to live as a holy people, one of the things they're interested in is how animals are treated. So in Isaiah we read that God is dissatisfied with animal sacrifice and is concerned that when the Israelites are making animal sacrifices, it's as bad as killing, it's as bad as murder, for example. So again, this question about eating and practice is really significant in the Old Testament. And then we read these amazing visions of Isaiah for what's going to happen when God's will is fully done in the future. When the Messiah comes, there'll be this new creation where there will be no killing, no creature preying on another creature, no violence between humans and other animals. The wolf will lie down with the lamb, and the lion and the kid, and so on and so on. And so while Israel is living within this current era in which there is intra-creaturely violence, it looks like somehow that falls short of God's full and complete will for how creatures should live alongside one another. And perhaps referencing back to this originating vision in Genesis 1 and 2, where there isn't predation and prey, and where Adam and later Eve are living in peaceful relations with other creatures in Genesis 2, because human beings have no economic interest. They're not eating animals, they don't need clothing from animals, they're living alongside animals in Genesis 2 in this grace-filled existence. So we're at these amazing scriptural visions of what it would look like for humans and other animals to live together and alongside one another. If we think back to Genesis 9, there's another element of that coexistence, which is to do with covenant. And so when God establishes the rainbow and promises never to flood the world again, what we find is that the covenant that God makes with Noah is not just with Noah, not just with his family, but with every living creature. Genesis 9 emphasizes again and again that this covenant of God's faithfulness is between God, humans, and all the other living creatures. And so again, we have a biblical vision that sees human beings alongside other animals. Now, you might think that by the time we get to the New Testament and think about what Christians believe about the person of Jesus Christ and God and the incarnation and atonement and redemption, that things look very different, that maybe we have the sense that animals sort of fall out of the zone of reference at that point. But again, I think we are apt to overlook some really foundational, important texts that also recall us to seeing humans and other animals as alongside one another. Again, we could start with, we could go back to the creation narrative in the prologue to John's Gospel. So another biblical framing of what creation means. And it's really clear that Jesus Christ, who is the Word, is intimately involved with the creation of all things. Without him, nothing was made that was made. And then the fundamental description of the incarnation in John's Gospel